from the beginning? Greetings, terrestrials, greetings, and welcome to Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. I, of course, your host, Cliff McCallister, the czar of the bizarre. Every week on this show, we discuss all the bizarre and unexplained things happening in our world. You callers call in and you tell us about the things that you can't explain. We share that, we broadcast that out to the world as a public service. This week, we've got something different. We've got a special guest on the show, and perhaps we'll be taking your calls with him a little later on. But, wait, the top news coming out of Israel. By the way, happy Hanukkah to those of you who celebrate. The former head of Israel's defense ministry has confirmed that there is a galactic federation. There have been pacts and agreements between people of Israel, people of America. The high-standing presidents of our times have met with extraterrestrials. They've signed contracts. They've made scientific agreements. But they don't want to tell us yet. The extraterrestrials have said it's too much for the humans. They will not be able to handle it. Well, I suppose this tracks, given how violently and crazily we've reacted to just about every other big change that's been going on. If we can't grow up and take a vaccine, then what are we going to do when the aliens show up? Anyway, let's get into our first guest tonight, our first and really our only guest. You know him from the Maryland Ensemble Theater. He's an actor and writer from Frederick, Maryland, a creator of the Laugh Station series, and his newest project, a book titled Crisis Actor, is a reflection on violence, fame, and terrorism. In addition to his own writing, this book contains the words of Timothy McVeigh, Zohar Sarnaev, and Pete Davidson. Pete Davidson declined to come on the show tonight, but we have for you the author, Matt Lee. Matt Lee, welcome to the show.
Hey, Cliff. Good to be here.
Stephen, you can bring his visual visage upon the screen. Oh, here we go.
I will sign the form.
All right, Matt, welcome to the program. Matt, could you tell us, for those of you, for those watching home who aren't from this book, tell us a little bit about Crisis Actor?
Sure. It just came out a couple months ago, and it's, I just describe it as like an experimental novel. It's part fiction, part nonfiction. Some people might describe it as like a hypertext. It sort of incorporates a fictitious narrative weaved in with some like direct quotations from a whole smattering of different individuals, artists, terrorists, politicians, you name it. And then just some almost kind of reportage almost style kind of nonfiction stuff. So, and like you said in your excellent intro, deals with fame, violence, art, all my favorite subjects.
Yes, it's all mixed in there for those of you who can see at home. This is just kind of the way the book is outlined, all these different little vignettes and government communiques, would you say? Memorandums?
Yeah, they're like memos. That's the best way to describe it. I imagine they're all being kind of passed back and forth on a top secret government server somewhere.
Right, these communiques of real things, a lot of these real things that have happened in the world.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. It covers a lot of ground. I mean, and you know, particularly deals with kind of blurring the lines between art and terrorism. So almost equating, you know, what's the difference between a performance art piece, you know, that might incorporate some kind of violence, like Chris Burden or the, you know, Viennese actionists, or, you know, some of those guys, and you know, an act of terrorism. And but like, you know, it gets into how sort of for both, there's a lot of kind of crossover, a lot of these sort of similarities, like how you can't, it's hard to define art in the same way that it's hard to define terrorism, but you sort of know it when you see it, right? So looking at that, and then also kind of framing that with an exploration of like, fame and what it means to be famous, whether it's for committing a heinous, act of terror or violence or whatever, or for, a book that you wrote.
Right. Well, and you're, well, Stephen, did you say something?
I was just.
Well, it just has to, I mean, anytime you make art, you're putting yourself out there, I mean, you're putting it into the public, right? So it becomes under scrutiny, under the public eye. Unless you're Emily Dickinson and you're just, sitting in your room filling a trunk full of poems that will never see the light of day until after you're long dead. But yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like, anytime you make art, you're like kind of I guess, exposing yourself in a way. And so there's, people that people are attracted to that, I guess, right? I mean, that's
right.
That's why there's, especially in America, people are so obsessed with celebrity and fame, right? It's like everybody wants to we have their 15 minutes of fame.
Absolutely.
Whether you get it by walking into a Walmart with an AR-15, or whether you get it from, being in a movie or something, right?
Oh yes, and I mean it was. I'm not sure if it's a true statistic in the book or something that you had pulled up on your own, but I took a screenshot of this one page. The probability that you will become famous is roughly equivalent to the probability that you will die in a terrorist attack. Everyone wants that little bit of fame, but it's like the odds of being that famous are about the same as the odds that someone will walk into a building you're in and blow it up. Which are hopefully not great odds.
To the best of my knowledge, that statistic is true. I did my best to, when I wasn't being deliberately fictitious, to kind of uphold the integrity of the truth as much as I could. So, my research was pretty extensive, and so I stand behind all the stats in the book, and so I believe that to be true. And when I found that one in particular, it really kind of stuck with me, and I think just kind of really spoke to the kind of world of the book. It's like, this is this is kind of the environment we've created for ourselves here. In this
absolutely. And like you said, everyone's obsessed with being famous, even if they walk into a Walmart with an AR-15, and they might ultimately know that they're not coming out of it. But going through your book, like, you included a message from Christopher Dorner's manifesto, he is correct me if I'm wrong, the former LAPD cop.
Yes, yeah.
who realized that the
Rampage
cops were
shooter.
Terribly corrupt and went out to try to do something about that, and that thing was killing a bunch of people. But in his manifesto, where he lays out all this abuse from the police, it's so long, and he gets so caught up in his own self-importance and eventual fame at the end of this, that he includes this message from the manifesto to Hollywood. It's kind of sad I won't be around to view and enjoy The Hangover 3. What an awesome trilogy. Todd Phillips, don't make any more hangovers after the third. Takes away the originality of its foundation. World War Z looks good, and The Walking Dead Season 3 second half looked intriguing. Damn, gonna miss Shark Week. And so I guess my question for you, Matt, is, do you think that the reason there has not been a Hangover 4 is because of Christopher Dorner's manifesto?
I think single-handedly that's the holding back the Hangover Part 4. That's the reason. Yeah, Dorner's manifesto is wild, and it's it's a sprawling 50 plus page document, and it's so captivating at the same time because it's like hallucinatory, but it's at the same time it's completely um banal. Like the section you just read is just, especially a few years removed from his rampage, and hearing the things that he was caught up with and thinking about World War Z, right? I mean, like at the moment of knowing he's going to go on this rampage and kill all these people, and go out in a blaze of gunfire,
And he's
and
gonna miss Shark Week.
and he's worried about Shark Week, right? Like
Sergeant Peppa, or Sergeant, Peppa Steppa said the most disturbing thing about him was his interest in World War Z.
Yeah, it's like his story is pretty wild too. Cause I mean, he's, some people could maybe view his sort of rampage as almost virtuous. He, at least in his mind, he probably thought it was of him.
Absolutely.
That, he thought he had been wronged by racist cops, which is certainly very, very, still to this day, very relevant problem in this country, right? And but kind of like you were saying, Cliff, he got sort of caught up in his own visions of grandeur, right? Sounds a lot like certain people, like the president of the United States.
Right.
So that's the that kind of that sort of overlap of psychology, chasing fame and being narcissistic, but also being psychopathic.
Well, and you even include that part from the author of American Psycho, when he says that the main character, Patrick Bateman, I think, says admired Trump back in the 80s when it was happening, but he wasn't so sure that he would admire Trump the way he is today.
Yeah, Trump is just, his trajectory is so fascinating to me, just how he's kind of remade himself, over the past couple of decades. That, in the 80s, he kind of embodied that sort of just Reagan era capitalistic playboy greed, sociopathic greed, right? He's like, and now then he sort of then became a reality television star, right? And that was kind of his new image, and then that sort of mutated into where he is today. It's people, it's like now it seems sort of like everybody's like, oh yeah, I saw it coming, but I think people forget just how I mean, at least for me, just how surprising it was when he became president. Especially when you compare him to the 80s version of himself. I guess in some ways he still is that 80s version of himself.
Yeah.
But he's definitely changed a lot over the years.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's the thing. His fame got the better of him. He could have just been a real estate mogul, but he had to get bigger and bigger until he became the president, until he was the most popular guy in the world.
Yeah, I think it's fame. It can be just as addictive as anything else. And since Trump has sworn off drinking, he has to, fill that void somehow. So that pursuit of fame, and is you can never reach the end, right? That's an endless. It's a fool's errand, right?
Right.
He'll never have enough.
There's until you're president of the world, which is currently not a thing. Now, God willing, it will not become one under him.
Well,
and also at any point, like, who wants that kind of power?
You could be president of the universe as well.
If you're the president of the United States, I think you're the leader of the world. Basically, you're at the head of the most powerful country in the world,
Yeah.
Which is, again, if you're greedy for power, right, that's exactly where you want to be. But it's at the same time, I think it kind of, and maybe in ways that Trump didn't even anticipate, kind of backfired on him. And I mean, even after he's not president anymore, he'll still have plenty of people who just adore him, and will, he'll have his base, his kind of cult, right? But like, he also kind of just has this sort of stain, right? He could have just been a kind of remembered as a goofy reality TV star.
Right.
But now he's going to be remembered as like the most hated man in the world, right?
Exactly. And it's sad because he'll also never like fully admit to that being what he's remembered as. He'll be living a charade for the rest of his life.
Well, it's sort of, when you're that famous, you can create your own reality. So I absolutely believe that's what, in his mind, that'll be how, right, how things really are.
Yeah, and of course he's so obsessed with his image, his fame, and being known as a winner, that if he were like a true monster that we kind of paint him as, then he would be using this time, that since he lost the election, to be committing all sorts of evil, heinous acts. But he just wants to be seen as a winner, so he's wasting all this time trying to prove that he won the election that he lost.
Well,
his own buffoonery is really is what's saved us from blowing up the rest of the world.
They are. I mean, his administration is, at least from my opinion, currently committing crimes against humanity with this sort of spate of federal executions that he's trying to pull. And
oh yes, absolutely.
In the next month, basically, which I think I read it was like the most in the past century, which is just like insane. So that's going to be the last. That's the button on his president. Right. Yes, a bunch of executions. Lovely.
That's awfully fitting. Well, if you are just tuning in, we are talking to author Matt Lee about his book Crisis Actor tonight. Matt, when we asked you to do the show, you said you would only come on if I asked you the tough questions. Well, your book contains a veritable montage of terror attacks, violence, and celebrity suicide. So perhaps the toughest question I have for you tonight, Matt, is, are you okay?
Yeah, I think the reason the book is so, I consciously wanted it to be visceral and very much not pull any punches. And I knew that that doing something like that would leave me open to misinterpretation. And I hope that people don't take the book literally, I guess I should say, right? Like it is violent, and a lot of the material is absolutely disturbing, right? I agree with that. But the whole, it is deliberately so. And I think the idea, the quote I always go back to is from Ballard, who's in the book a bunch, but him, he's talking about his work and how he wants to, take the human race's face and rub it into its own vomit and then make it look into the mirror. Right. So that's sort of what I hope, at least that's what I'm trying to achieve with the book. It's a violent book, but I consider it a work of anti-violence.
Right. You're trying to prove how awful and to be frank, fucked up our society is right now.
Yeah, it's a commentary on what I perceive as very urgent but long-standing problems, in our society, right? I guess when I started writing the book, I just kind of felt, I had this feeling that I was just complicit, in just like a massive death machine, for lack of a better phrase, right? Like just living in a country like this, like the United States, and just seeing, atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity after atrocity, right? And you start to get, people get numb to it, which is the sad thing, right? And it's like, the stuff in the book, people forget about it like instantly, because something replaces it immediately within 24 hours, right? That's like, it took me so long to write the book because just one mass shooting and one suicide bombing and after the other just kept happening over and over and over again.
Oh, there's so much in this book that there's stuff that I don't remember or things that I miss. And so as I'm reading this, I'm also like, oh, that's a name that I don't really recognize, and there's a date next to it. Well, let's Google that and see what it is. And I'm going on all these Google searches over the course of the book that I'm surely on a list somewhere.
Yeah,
Are you concerned after publishing this that you will not be allowed to fly on a plane anymore?
I'll definitely be on the no-fly list. Yeah. No, I considered trying to send a copy to the White House, but it seemed frivolous. But yeah, no, the book, part of the design of the book, I guess, is to hopefully kind of instigate some of the reader's curiosity and kind of, like you said, sending people down the rabbit hole. That's why I wanted the book to kind of be dense in a way that made it, kind of like a maze where it's, one thread leads to something else, leads to something else, leads to something else. And then, before you know it, it's like, how the hell did we go from talking about Osama bin Laden to Sylvia Plath, right?
Right. Oh, that's what I almost pictured. I said, I've got to buy another copy of this book, and so I can cut out every bit on every page and get some good old cork boards on the wall and just start putting them up there. Get some red string and follow this thread, because there's so many different pieces to this book.
I would love if you did something like that. That would make me very happy. Yeah, but that's part of, I guess, what a lot the stuff in the book are just things that I'm obsessed with, and then I sort of I personally love kind of like research and stuff. So just I'm always reading stuff. So just finding one little tidbit that might be otherwise buried, right, in the kind of endless news cycle, right, and then connecting that to something earlier, that's for me part of the fun of it, I guess.
Yes. Well, and even in the theme of like what a crisis actor is, I mean, that in and of itself is something that's based in conspiracy. And there's so many little things going on in this book. Like I said, I get to, on page 8, very early on, memorandum number 2933 for internal use only, subject Francesca Woodman, January 19th, 1981. And so I look her up because I'm like, this seems important, just a name and a date. And I look it up and I realize, like, this is the date that this artist committed suicide. But I'm reading it too because, crisis actors as a whole, the idea is based in conspiracy. So I'm like, well, why did she die? Like, did she really commit suicide? Or is it like with Hunter S. Thompson, where there's the theory that, he knew too much or whatever, and they came in and shot him in the head. And so, and I get to the point where I Google it, and I Google her name and the date of her death, and then conspiracy, and nothing shows up. I'm just, in the own world of the book, I'm assuming there must be something up with this, and it's not. It's sadly a traditional suicide.
Well, it's the idea, I think the backbone of the book is what is real, what isn't real, what is fact, and what is fiction. And again, just sort of with Woodman, was obsessed with fame. She wanted to be a famous artist, and that is, part of what drove her to commit suicide. At least that's sort of what she wrote about in her journals. So, and she was so young too, and just so in her work also really kind of has always spoke to me as also being something that kind of sort of distorts reality. So in that way, she, to me, fits into the world of the book. Is there a conspiracy? It's hard to say. I mean, it is strange that her parents are both artists, and her, if I'm remembering right, there's a great documentary about her, and after she passed away, her father started almost like mimicking her style, like almost kind of copying her style of photographs, and like made that his whole career as I don't know, for what, right? As a way to pay tribute to his daughter, or as a way to cash in on his daughter's work, right? Is he exploiting his daughter if he does that, right? So like, to me, there's all sorts of layers there that just, again, it's
yeah, that's
art, terror, pain, fame. It's all the same in the world of the book.
it all bleeds together. Like, and I think a good example of this is you pull a lot of information or resources from I'm trying to remember it correctly, Marina Abramovic's Rhythm Zero exhibition.
Yes, I mean, just again, as a sort of very well-known, very famous, but still, I think to this day, provocative piece where she basically stood neutral with a table of objects and permitted the audience to sort of do unto her whatever they chose. And so, yeah, something like that, you know, having to just that fine line between art and entertainment and depravity and violence, right? Because at least the way she described it, it kind of, her, you know, that performance started tamely, but then as time went on, people became emboldened and then started to inflict real violence on her. And I think, you know, it sort of culminated with somebody pointing a gun at her head. So just put it, you know, when the artist puts themselves at risk like that, kind of really puts their life on the line for their work, to me is very powerful. And I started to kind of equate that with, you know, a militant. Why not? This in the same way, or a terrorist, or what we want to call it, in the same way, sort of willing to die for a cause or for your art or whatever it might be. So that, yeah, just sort of when it goes to that extreme, I think that's very fascinating terrain.
Oh, and I mean that ties right into just the pull quote that's on the back of the book. An artist's statement and a terrorist manifesto are synonymous.
Yeah, it's just, it gets back to that whole thing, you know, who decides, you know, like who decides who is a terrorist, you know, is the young man in Iraq with a suicide bomb fighting, you know, what, you know, like occupiers, right? I mean, is he, one might call him a freedom fighter, the other's going to call him a terrorist, right? Same thing with how do you call yourself an artist? You know, right?
Right.
Like, oh, so-and-so is not a real artist. Oh yeah, that's a master artist right there. So it's just like, to me, there's a lot of parallels with that.
Yeah, and we've got a comment in the chat from Sergeant Peppa Steppa, says discipline, conviction, and then delusion, control, as far as how both these actors work and these militants would work.
Yeah, right. All those are all parallels to draw there. Exactly. Right. You have to be completely, yeah, like the discipline, right? The dedication that takes, and the element of, with a lot of it, unpredictability, randomness.
Yes, we've got one more comment before we go to a quick break. This one's coming from Sergeant Peppa Steppa again. I believe in reference to your book, Matt, says, I hope it is to be seen as art rather than terrorism, illustrating how thin that line can be.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sort of the delicacy of the distinction is kind of what fascinates me. Um, there and some, some people arguing that certain art has veered into terrorism, and on the flip side, the kind of iconography of terrorism becoming sort of commodified in an artistic way. I mean, to me, the image of the Twin Towers, smoking against the New York City skyline is like I wouldn't be surprised if like Andy Warhol did a print of that. You know what I'm saying? Like the imagery becomes so ingrained in the kind of people's consciousness that it almost reaches the level of art. But then I get into it in the book. It's like people like the artist Richard Serra saying you can't, it's sort of a betrayal of art to equate the two. Or at least it's sort of surrendering. I think he says it's like surrendering our humanity, right? Like an evil distortion of what art is supposed to be. But I don't know. I think even, like the image of like a guy in like a black balaclava, with the Islamic State flag, that to me is sort of evocative in a kind of artistic way.
Well, it's like you go to, I believe it's the American History Museum, or at least one of the Smithsonian's, where you can see the Unabomber's shack. And it's there in the middle of a room, and it's lit up
exhibit,
like
right?
it's art.
Yeah, and in a way that is, you could describe that as like a kind of pop art, I think,
Yeah, like it's not intended to be, but it's treated with that kind of reverence.
And he's become kind of, that famous, drawing of him, that FBI drawing of him is like so iconic, right? And he's just, that whole thing has become kind of a kitschy sort of cliche almost, right? And people can make fun of it now, even though what he did, and I mean, in his writings as well, are just very, very, out there. I mean, he's, you can't, he's doing despicable things. He's sending bombs in the mail and trying to kill people. That's not good. That's not artistic. But the image of that guy has become pop art almost the same way that Elvis Presley has, right? I mean,
right. They're just as popular.
Yeah. Well,
some would say that Timothy McVeigh, the Unabomber, is the Elvis Presley of murderers.
Oh, well, Tim McVeigh is not the Unabomber.
Well,
are you doing another conspiracy theory on me?
No, look, we do conspiracies and we do aliens and UFOs on this show. We don't dip our toes into true crime that often,
well,
so we'll get the folks mixed up from time to time.
There is a conspiracy that I think they knew each other, or like communicated or something, but I don't know I can't speak to the veracity.
So which one was Timothy McVeigh?
Timothy McVeigh was the Oklahoma City bomber.
Oh, okay. So I had the weapon correct. I just had
Ted Kaczynski, right?
Person
Ted Kaczynski was the Unabomber.
Yeah.
I mean, very different ideologies, right? I mean, because Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was more almost kind of like rejecting technology, right? I mean, whereas McVeigh was very, very right wing. I mean, I think it's in the book, like he thought that he left the NRA because he thought they were too weak, right? Like, but again, like, to some people, McVeigh is kind of like a folk hero, right? I mean, there's absolutely pockets of far-right groups still operating in America that would idolize somebody like Timothy McVeigh.
Very strange indeed that someone would do such a thing. We're going to take a quick break, Matt, and we'll be right back in about 30 seconds or so. So if you're just tuning in, we're interviewing Matt Lee, author of Crisis Actor. We'll be talking to him a little bit more after the break about crisis acting and all sorts of things on Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. Steven, take it away.
Being transported to the days of old with the beloved holiday tale of redemption with A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Maryland Ensemble Theater's Fun Company has created a delightful holiday treat, a radio play for the whole family with A Christmas Carol, an audio experience. They'll bring the story to life with all your favorite characters like Scrooge,
Humbug,
Tiny Tim,
God bless us, everyone,
the Cratchits, and more. Download now at marylandensemble.org. Sponsored by the Frederick News Post, Key 103, 1069 The Eagle, in partnership with the Weinberg Center for the Arts.
Greetings, terrestrials, and welcome back to Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. I, of course, your host, the Czar of the Bazaar, Cliff McCallister. Every week on this show, we take your calls to hear about the strange and unexplained things in this world. And what you just saw was an advertisement for the Maryland Ensemble Theater. Every week on this show, we dedicate this show to the Maryland Ensemble Theater because they're the only ensemble theater with the guts to put us on the air. Right now, you can get A Christmas Carol, available from the Maryland Ensemble Theater as an audio experience, keeping the holiday tradition alive with a nice, shiny MP3 file to guide you through the journey of Ebenezer Scrooge. You can get that for $9.99 at marylandensemble.org/carol2020. And if you like our show and everything we do here, you can support us by making a donation to the Maryland Ensemble Theater at marylandensemble.org/donate. And of course, this show every week right here on twitch.tv/metcomedynight. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, tune in right here to see the Comedy Pigs performing some incredible short-form improv. Now, getting back into our program, Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister, we are interviewing author of the book Crisis Actor, Matt Lee. Matt Lee, how are you doing tonight? Welcome back.
Doing great, Cliff. Happy to be here.
Matt, do you have your copy of the book? I want to bridge the gap here while we're here. Let's see if we can't get these two to become one. I think you want to point it to the other side of the screen. There you go. Oh,
ooh, there it is.
Close. Here we go. There. Whoa, look at that. Right there on the thing. I guess it. There we go.
Marvel.
We've beamed the book into cyberspace for all who are viewing at home to be aware of. We got some more questions for you tonight. We were talking about the Maryland Ensemble Theater, and Matt, you've worked at the Maryland Ensemble Theater for quite some time. And here's a question for you. This is coming from a friend of the show, Noel. Noel, they asked, have you ever worked as an emergency response actor?
Yeah, that sort of was the impetus of the book. I was a crisis actor, not a conspiratorial one, a real paid crisis actor at a military hospital, basically. Well, I guess a school that was like for military doctors, but we did, for a few years I worked there. It's really wild. They sort of hire actors from the DMV area, and they sort of, pool all these oddball actors together and sort of do all sorts of different, they call them events, where it might be one day you're playing a dead body in a active shooter scenario, and they make you up in, fake blood and prosthetics and everything. But also doing things with like psychiatry and kind of mental health training. Like one of the characters I played was a schizophrenic. I played like one time I had to play a suicidal soldier, so it was a whole range. And just as soon as I started working there, immediately I was like, this would be a cool setting for something. And so that was kind of the seed of the book, started there. So just that, taking that location and my experiences there, but then just kind of making it a little more surreal was what I tried to do with the book. But yeah, it's absolutely, the book's informed by my real world experiences.
And this, Noel went on to say, this isn't a question, but they worked as an emergency actor for EMT/firefighters in West Virginia. And there was a very, very dangerous fire all around them while they were working. And if they moved from designated safe zones, they could be burned. Did you encounter any like real danger when you were doing this job?
So I never got to do this, but I knew some people who were hired by, I guess they were like military police, and they would, they had, and this was like the best paying of all the gigs, but you had to wear Kevlar, like a bulletproof vest, and they would use live rounds on you. So you were getting shot for real. So I mean, yeah, and so like the thing with the fire and everything, like a lot of times there is a certain level of risk involved because they want to make it as real as possible, right? I never had to do anything quite that extreme, but I knew people who did. The thing with them using the live ammo always blew my mind. But they were like, yeah, all these actors being like totally nonchalant about it, Cliff, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you are.
I refilled my cup off screen, and I mute my mic when I do that so nobody thinks I'm peeing.
We all know you're peeing, Cliff.
I do it throughout the entire show. If there's a moment where I'm not peeing, we go to a commercial break. But anyway, like I was saying about your book, there is a point where the actor, the crisis actor in the story, in his storyline, mentions that they're doing live rounds today, and you get paid more on the days where they're live rounds. And I thought that's where that story turns into fiction.
Yeah, that was kind of always the path that particular narrative thread was going to take. That it would, if it like going from these, what they called simulations, eventually kind of morphing into the real thing. So yeah, I mean, it's like there is, you kind of touched on this, but people really think that these so-called crisis actors are deployed into real life mass shooting scenarios, like by the deep state, or whatever you want to call it, right? But I mean, there's a particularly like the Newtown shooting, right? I mean, there's like that whole conspiracy about that was just they were all actors, which is just so, it's absolutely ludicrous, but it's fascinating to me that people really buy into it. And again, it's like, to me, it's like that. I think it's bad, but I also can see how it's a creative outlet in a way for those people, right? Like the sort of mythology of conspiracy theories is really fascinating, and just the level of detail and care that these people put into kind of spinning these conspiracy theories and really, really kind of convincing themselves, really buying into this fiction, right? So that's always just compelling to me, and I try to address that in the book.
And there's likely a certain denialism there as well, because you don't want to admit that the world is so messed up that someone will go in and shoot a bunch of kids, and at the same time you don't want someone to take your guns away, even though it seems like that might be a good reason to. And so you get so built up in this idea that like they must have hired these actors to fake this massacre so that they can take our guns away. When if they really wanted to take your guns away, they'd just do it if they had that kind of power.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers to it. I think to me, it's fascinating that, in a certain way, I can see it as a defense mechanism, kind of like you were saying, it's a denial of just people cannot accept that this happened. it's like they go to sleep, which is a very childish reaction, but a lot of people have that reaction when they're confronted with something that's like unthinkable. I mean, it's the same thing with 9/11, right? Like people refuse to accept, they can't accept that we were beaten, essentially, right? I mean, that the terrorists won that, right? I mean, that was a successful, hugely successful terrorist attack. And people like cannot accept that, right? Or there's I think another layer to it where people want, again, people want to feel special, right? So they want to think, that's why they kind of feed into conspiracy theories, because it sort of validates them and makes them think, oh, like I'm clued into the truth and other people aren't, right? I mean, it's the same, that it kind of has a religious quality in that way. It's almost like a people need to put their faith in it, right? Like they have to believe in it. But it's really just because they're just, empty on the inside. They need to fill it with something. So why not conspiracy theories?
Why not get some good old cork boards and some red string?
I'm still stuck on something though. So like the day that they use live rounds with the action with the actors, are you just like assuming they hit you in the chest all the time?
Yeah,
that's the hope.
From the way they described it, there were certain controls in effect, like when the shooting had to take place under very specific conditions in a very specific way. And of course they have, with all these events, there's always moderators kind of watching and stuff, right? And I think, and they're in, I think, I guess I want to say they're using a low caliber firearm, but it's still a real rounds, right? So yeah, it's just, again, it's like that, they pay well, so people will do anything for a paycheck.
Oh yeah, we've got a comment in the chat coming from Sergeant Peppa Steppa again, says, can't trust long-haired brunette girls who cry at tragedies. Isn't that the truth of any crisis actor there? Now, here's another question from Noel regarding the school shooter surveillance tapes that are going throughout the book. Was that based off any particular incident, or was this kind of an amalgamation of different events?
Yeah, and it's certainly informed by any number of school shootings. But I think an amalgamation is a good way to describe it. Yeah, it is. It's my own kind of creation, I guess, right? But it's like it certainly draws on accounts of absolutely real school shootings, and just trying to think of again, I think for me, one of the most difficult parts of the book, and I imagine it's probably difficult for readers as well, but is trying to put myself in that headspace and just trying to see from the shooter's point of view, from the terrorist point of view, like these people who are certainly they do heinous acts of violence, but and they're vilified, right? And they're sort of and the media kind of turns these people into abstractions, right? Don't glorify the shooter by publishing their picture or whatever, but they're still humans, right? So just trying to remember that common humanity and just sort of try to see through their eyes. I think like if you've ever seen like the film Elephant, the Gus Van Sant film Elephant, it's kind of told from the point of view, it's based on Columbine, but it's sort of it's sympathetic to the protagonist, and the protagonist is like told from the point of view of the shooters. So yeah, just to me, that was a sort of rebellious kind of act to sympathize with the perpetrators of these atrocities, really.
Well, and there are even some important like pull quotes in your book where I found myself reading them, and they're bits from manifestos or explanations as to why somebody, ordered like specifically why one of the Al-Qaeda leaders or one of the ISIS leaders ordered the destruction of these historic sites. And he was talking about how people are so concerned that they're falling apart already, and they want to devote all this energy to these sites, but nobody cares about the 200,000 people that just got bombed out in that same country. And so we're all concerned about the property, but not the actual people. And so he destroyed them because he was like, these aren't the important thing. And you're kind of go, well, I agreeing with ISIS here, I guess. Like,
yeah, it puts you in a weird kind of position, but he's right. Oh, that guy Mullah Omar has a point. He's saying you're privileging art over human life, and especially in the West, we do that all the time. Especially in America, we do that all the time, right? It's like we throw money at art preservation while the line to get free groceries gets longer every day, right? So it's just like it is a sort of like hypocrisy of our society. I mean, it's not to say, yeah, art is important, but is it more important than human life? I don't know. And then, yeah, so of course, like that to the extreme, to the nth degree, the Islamic State kind of with their sort of attack on art, right? Like this sort of saying it's blasphemous, and people being so horrified by that, right? And caring more about that than civilians dying in drone strikes, right? So it's just those contradictions are they're tough to wrestle with, but I feel like we have to. So
you are taking America's face and shoving it in the dirt, and shoving it in a
true.
mirror and saying, look at yourselves with this book. Matt, we're getting towards the end of the program. Of course, this book, can you tell us where it's available, how it's available? How can people read Crisis Actor by Matt Lee?
Well, right now it's on Amazon is probably the easiest way to get it. Google it, it'll pop up. If you type it into any massively evil corporate capitalistic killing machine, and it will spit out my book, which to me is kind of a sort of dark irony.
I was going to say, that sounds like the ultimate. They're so concerned about making money that they'll publish this that contains bits and pieces of manifestos that were like, those people who made money were very bad.
Yeah, it's like I said, I'm sort of part of this system, whether I like it or not. I exist in this system. So even though I'm participating in it, I'm at least trying to not condone the evils that the system produces. So this book it's kind of like I'm like a sniper on the inside is how I like to look at it, I guess.
You're a crisis actor infiltrating the system.
That's it.
Matt, what the holidays are coming up. Which family member do you think would love this book the most?
Your racist, MAGA-loving uncle.
Probably for the wrong reasons, but I'm sure they would.
Yeah. If you are interested in art, if you're interested in conspiracies, if you're interested in crimes against humanity, I recommend picking this book up. Yeah, I think I always tell the story. My one grandmother, who's like famously stoic, was like, "I'm getting your book, and I want you to sign it for me, but I refuse to read it. So buy it for your grandma. She won't read it."
An incredible endorsement.
Yeah.
Crisis Actor by Matt Lee. Buy it for your grandma. She's never gonna read it. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I wish you a very happy holiday.
Right back at you, Cliff. Thanks for having me. This was an absolute blast. Very fun to chat with you and spawn some new conspiracy theories, hopefully.
So fun to have you on the show and discuss your book, Crisis Actor. Those of you watching at home, make sure you check it out. All right, well, another thing you might want to check out before we go, the Maryland Ensemble Theater. Of course, every program, every episode of Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister is dedicated to the Maryland Ensemble Theater. You can support them by making a donation at marylandensemble.org/donate. Get your copies of A Christmas Carol, the audio experience, and check out the Comedy Pigs tomorrow night at 9 o'clock right here on twitch.tv/MetComedyNight. I'd like to thank each of you viewing at home and commenting in the chat. Thank you, Stephen Craig, our incredible technical director for the show. Helps things really fly. To our friend Isaac, if you're watching the show right now, Godspeed to you tomorrow. For Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister, I'm your host, the Czar of the Bizarre, Cliff McCallister. Stay strange, terrestrials.